I remember the morning after awakening, the first awakening, which is now 16 years ago. I was a therapist at the time, living in London, working as a psychotherapist in my own private practice. And every once in a while, about once a month, we would meet with all the other colleagues to do something called supervision, which is a requirement as a therapist to meet with colleagues and to discuss, the difficult cases we're having, the challenges we're having, maybe with some patients. And, I loved going to supervision. It was a wonderful time where you can sort of be with like-minded people and hear other takes on things. And I always looked forward to going. And also, I always felt a little bit intimidated going there because actually I was the least seasoned of that group of people. They were all very, even more qualified than I was on paper, and very knowledgeable and very successful. And I always felt honored to be invited to the room, even. And so there was always this little sense of intimidation, even though it wasn't, anxiety or anything like that, but it was always there subtly in the background. But that morning, after awakening, and the day before, there had been this recognition of presence, of awareness itself. And it had been very, what would then become life-changing. But in that moment, it was just a real release, I would say, of, the contraction of the idea of being a someone. And there was this beautiful and very simple and quiet recognition. I say quiet because sometimes people believe that awakening has to be this big event with fireworks and everything. But it was very quiet. It was profound. It was clear. It was obvious. And it was very quiet. And it was like of course, I always knew that this was it, that this was what I was, this beingness, this undifferentiated beingness, and there was this freedom and this feeling of, I remember the feeling distinctly, actually. It was the sweetest. It was a mixture of relief and of like a sort of sense of having landed, having arrived. Oh, this is what this is. And tears had come down my cheeks, and it was very beautiful. And I didn't sleep much that night because I didn't need to sleep. There was this energy there. And the next day, even if I hadn't slept that much, there was still this aliveness, this energy. And so I go to supervision. And it was like a completely different experience of the supervision I had always been to. And I briefly wanted to describe how it felt because I feel that it reflects a little bit the experiential, the experience of living awakening. And first of all, that sense of intimidation that I was telling you about was nowhere to be found. And it wasn't an arrogance or, it wasn't the opposite of that. It was just this groundedness and just presence and feeling worthy just for the simple fact of being. Worthy for the simple fact of being, not because I was a someone, or I was a therapist, or it was just the fact of being there that was enough to feel okay in your skin, so to speak. And then usually I would take notes. There was note taking. There was a book of the therapy we practiced that I would consult, to before being sure to say the right thing or to make the right intervention. But that day the book stayed in the bag, and there wasn't even a need to take out the book or to take out the notes, and I was just listening. I was listening to what my colleagues were saying and responding from what felt true in that moment. So usually there would be that sort of thinking of, I hope I'm going to say the right thing. Is it the right thing? Is it necessary for me to speak right now? Maybe what I have to say is not important enough to say it right now. Again, that kind of thinking wasn't there. And so there was just this openness and receptivity to what was being said. And so I remember that at one point the colleague explained an issue she was having with one of her patients. And, she wasn't sure how to proceed, or wasn't even sure how to conceptualize the issue that the client was having. And so I just found myself blurt out what I thought about it. And I remember being surprised that my thoughts just came out. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's what I think you should do in that situation. And that's what I think that patient has in terms of, emotional problem or personality issue. And I remember everybody turned around in the meeting a little bit surprised that I had just blurted out something, and they were like, oh, okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. And then a few weeks later in the next meeting with the same people, that colleague turned around and said, oh, by the way, Debbie, remember that intervention you made the other time? You were completely right. That was exactly what was happening for that patient. And I remember in that moment, there wasn't this sort of egoic thought of, yeah, I was right, I knew it. But there was this deeper sense that it was kind of obvious that was the intervention. There was an obviousness to it. And also there was a sense that it wasn't me that had that intuition. It was like the intuition had arrived through me in some way. But I wasn't responsible for it. I wasn't the maker of it. And there was just a sense of obviousness. Oh, and I just said, I'm glad to hear that. But there was just this knowing that, without the thinking mind being so active, and without us believing everything the mind says like it's gospel, including those insecurities, then life is free to express itself, and it is much more intuitive and in a lot of ways on the ball, because there is this deeper intelligence that is not obstructed, by a me that is not sure. So that was the very strange day I had the morning after the awakening.